Howdy, everyone. We're live. No one else is on screen yet. Just figured since we're not streaming the regular session tonight, I would jump online, see if anyone wanted to talk about D&D. It's on for a little bit at least. One thing I thought I would do for anyone who joins the stream later, all of the replay crew, I want to go over, some of the basics of how you might want to get involved with Dungeons and Dragons. You probably heard about it a bit. You've seen us play. It is actually something that was played more frequently in person. In fact, when I started playing back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was very much like, if you ever watched Stranger Things on Netflix, the very first episode, I believe it opens with the kids in the basement playing Dungeons and Dragons. And that was very much how it was played. It was an in-person game. You rolled the actual physical dice. You had these little miniatures. You had a grid pattern map, which I remember was kind of funny because my mom would do like sewing, and she had this big bolt, kind of cardboard fold-out type thing with the square patterns on it. And that was kind of a fun way of just set that out, and you can play on that. You didn't have to actually have graph paper. It was just the right size. Or you can move pieces around. And let's see, I'm not sure who's online, if anyone wanted to say anything or not, but if you're interested in coming on, I will, let's see if there's a way. To send this out. Let me post it in chat. If anyone wants to join as a panelist, chat for a little while. It's been a kind of a long day for me. I was playing some other video game till late last night, and then got up for guests. And my daughter was just the last one to leave. So anyway, going back to Dungeons and Dragons and how to get started. It started with in person, rolling the dice. We used to get a few different books. There were three main books. One was the Dungeon Master's Guide. And, when I was a teenager, having that Dungeon Master's Guide, it's like, hey, these are all the ways that you can actually run the adventure. But you actually don't need that. There's only one set of rules that anyone really needs, and that is in the Player's Handbook. This is the current version. And you actually don't even need to buy the book, but if you go to a game shop or card shop where people might buy Pokemon cards or other things, they'll probably sell this there. It's always better to support the local store, just like we support our local fish stores. If you're into gaming, support your local game store. And D&D Beyond is is a company that was just acquired by Wizards of the Coast, which actually owns Dungeons and Dragons now. It was actually formed by a company, I think it was called TSR, long ago by someone named Barry Gygax. It's evolved a lot over the years. When I first started playing, it was very, very, well, not very different, but a little different, to the point where when I got a 5th edition game, 5th edition meaning they've had more than 5 editions. It was actually a 3.5 from what I heard. But I started in the very early days, stopped, had all my other things going on in life, like college and so on, and then rediscovered it after Stranger Things came out, decided to get a copy of the game for my son, who was a teenager at the time, or maybe he was about to turn 20. And it was fun, actually getting to play at a game store for a few times. And that's when we all went under lockdown a few months later. Very, very different. And we discovered Roll20 and other ways to play. There was a system called Warhorn. I'll have to look that up. Let's see if I can find it. But it was a way of finding games that were live. So it would list, hey, on Saturday at 2:00, you can go to this game store and they have a D&D table set up for people to play D&D. and you can sign up online. Warhorn was this online sign up place for you to find your local game. And when the lockdown started, it was a way to find online games. There was a quick shift to using Discord. So anyone who uses the Fishcord channel on Discord, or other a lot of streamers have their own Discord channels. It's very much the same thing. It's there for the gamers, and people would go and do their voice chats using Discord, and they would play D&D using something like what's called a virtual tabletop. We're using one called Roll20. I think there's another one called Fantasy Grounds that was popular at the time, and there was an up-and-coming one called what was it called again? I should remember because I've got it. I'll remember it. But anyway, Foundry was the other one. Foundry VTT. That one was a kind of a unique one in that it was developed by one person, and you bought it once, and that was it. But you had to host it yourself. But it was always constantly evolving during the lockdown. I think because the developer who started it was probably, it was really taking off, and he had a lot of subscriptions and could devote his time to it. But that's how I found it. Warhorn.net is the site that I looked at, looking for games in person and shifting the games online. I was playing on Roll20 a lot. My son went from playing video games at home because he couldn't go to class. He was in college at the time, or just starting, and or halfway through. So he was halfway through college, and so he was suddenly, for a whole semester, nothing to do. He was playing several times a day, almost every day, Dungeons and Dragons for 3 or 4 months or more, to the point where he was the rule checker for me. Just like if you watch our stream, Alexander's the one who knows more of the rules. It's been so long since I DM'd. It's been at least a year that I keep forgetting, and he's a good reminder. My son was doing the same thing for me when I was starting online. So I actually play online with a group on Fridays. It's really fun because they're mostly on the West Coast. It's just kind of the group that stuck with me. And when they decided to go and do their home game and still do it remote instead of in person, then I was able to tag along. I didn't have to live in California where they are. I could still join and play. And that's the fun thing about it. I mean, these originally the game was designed to be played in person, like on Stranger Things. If you watch that first episode, they were playing in the basement. But now a lot of it is online. And let me say hi to everyone now. I can see there's people here. So Xanadudu, Craig's Catfish Cave, Sketty Nona, TJ Autocraft, welcome. Also, anyone who's doing replay, welcome. And so it's, for me, it was a way to kind of get back into playing the game, going online and playing instead of doing it in person. It got to the point where I was so used to finding games online and playing. I was actually playing a few games in Singapore where they played in English rather than in whatever their native languages were, because it was a very much a melting pot. Played a few games out of a game shop in Norway. They were also speaking English, very good English. A lot of the European countries, a lot of people learn English in school. So it was just a way for them to bring in more people, I think, rather than speaking in their native language, which they probably would have done in the game shop, right? If they were playing there. But then suddenly I was like signed up for a game. I think it was in Colorado or Ohio. Or actually, those were two different games where I was like, 15 minutes before game start, I'm like, when are you sending the links to Roll20? And the response I got back was, oh, no, this is in person. This is at the game shop. Our game shop's reopened. And so a lot of people went back to the game shop. I think I have not been back yet. It's actually a 45-minute drive from me each way. If it's like if it's on a weekday, 30 minutes if it's a weekend. So actually it's more convenient for me to play online now. And with the video chat now, or just doing everything over Discord with the voice chat, it's actually very, very convenient. Just pick up a game and play. So if anyone's really interested in playing, they can let me know. Even if it's not streamed, I know a lot of people don't want to stream. Um, and if that's the case, then you can still play online with others. Roll20 has a feature where you can go to roll20.net. You don't need a paid account. You normally use a free account. I actually have a pro account that I use because for me it's more convenient to actually have the extra features, and I pay a monthly subscription fee. But everyone who joins my games on Roll20 has that advantage of the pro version. And a lot of the people who DM, there's actually a link for getting players, to find a dungeon master or dungeon masters to find new players, because there's always people coming and going. Sometimes people need to drop out because they can't make a regular game that they were playing. Sometimes people are playing in another part of the world, and it's harder for them to play, a bunch of people on the East Coast or the West Coast of the United States. So they play there. For anyone who's really, really interested in something a little more organized, there is something called Adventures League. And the people who make Dungeons and Dragons set it up so that every year it's a new campaign. It's played out of a campaign book that's relatively new. It's kind of a way to say, hey, we've introduced this, but here's a way to play it in an organized fashion, where if you jump in and you need a 4th level character, you keep a log of the games you played. You can register for a free ID, and that's the ID people can use to look you up if you have an online record of where you played. And it's really kind of more of an honor system where people say, are you really playing? Okay, you are playing. You played at this place and this place. And if I wanted to fact check, I could actually go and say, well, do I know any of these people that you played with before to get your character to level 4? Normally, the way they do that is in the beginning, I think if you play 4 hours, and usually that's the length of time you play is 4 hours in a session, to advance a level. Sometimes they'll let you advance more than once. And I played with a few places where when you're playing that first level campaign and it's an intro 2 hours into it, they'll say, hey, everyone can level up from level 1 to level 2 because you're a little more powerful. It's a little more fun. You're less afraid of getting killed in the game, which is kind of handy. But it's a way to get started. Right now, what I'm looking at here is, for those of you who may have missed it, this is my Dungeon Master view of the map where everyone was playing, where they went into the Growlin Villa and they raided this villa. So this is what the Roll20 map looks like. I actually imported this from another source. I have, there's a DM's Guild, it's called, where people will post content. Someone posted maps that they had made. So I actually got this map from there. I actually added some extra overlays, like these numbers, like the G12 for the room, is a description in the adventure book to say, oh, G12 is this room. Here's what the people see. If there's anybody in that room, are they hostile? How to describe it. But it's up to the dungeon master to describe what happens as the players move through the adventure. And there's a lot of improvisation that it can occur, because the characters don't have to just go into combat. A lot of times they can negotiate their way through. Sometimes they may decide, if they come across a door, am I going to listen at the door first, see if there's anything behind it? Do I hear anything? Is the door locked? If it is locked, maybe it's, a barbarian type that just wants to charge in and break the door open. What do they need to break the door open? Versus, oh, I want to pick the lock. Is it an easy lock to pick? Or does it have a special magic spell cast where they need they need to cast another spell to dispel that? Or is there a trap? All of these things are present. The players can choose how they're going to progress through the adventure. They get to decide amongst themselves, and this is one of the reasons I think it's a really good thing for kids in a controlled environment, is that they learn to collaborate. And there's actually a TED Talk I saw a while back where someone's saying, why is D&D so important? It allows people to collaborate, especially if kids are learning to play. They can collaborate on, this is how we're going to do things. Someone will have an idea, And I think you've seen it in the game. People who came in and never played Dungeons and Dragons, but they're just problem solving. They're talking their way through it. How do you guys want to go through this? And sometimes, you know, interesting things happen. Someone has a suggestion as a dungeon master. I get to say, "Oh, wait, that's that you can try, right?" And I can think, well, you know what? That's a realistic response. The guide for that adventure may say, "Hey, these are these characteristics of these people that are interacting with. You get to decide what they want to do. Maybe someone really is the bad guy. Maybe someone really is very steadfast in their beliefs, and they're not going to waver if they can help it. Versus someone who's going to cave instantly and say, "Look, I don't want you to hurt me." You know, we broke into this one place where these guys were basically stealing bones from the crypts for a necromancer. I mean, we're going to find out what happens next. But the people they encountered, they were just henchmen. They were doing the dirty work for someone they were not bought into what they were doing. So when these powerful people come and break in, they're like, "I don't want to get hurt," right? And so how the game progresses is as much what the players choose as how the DM decides to align the flavor of the game. Make sure that they hit the flavor of are these people antagonists that you're meeting? Are these helpful people that you're meeting? How do the players' interactions maybe guide their way through the path of the story? And it really is a way of storytelling. The adventure books are just like this. I mean, they come in a book. I mean, it's a real book with pages, a lot of detail, a lot of graphics, and the story. There's a lot of backstory in the adventures too, to the point where there are times where you get the adventure and you want to look at it, but you only look at it if you're not going to want to spoil the play as a player. And a lot of times, you can get a lot out of the story. It's not like it's a little different from reading a novel, because what it's doing is giving you the background, and here's what could happen, and all the different things that can happen. And yes, TJ, the DM has all these different options, and they can even just make it up. Someone decided to do something and it's not written there, but because of what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, and the background in the adventure guide about the characters they're interacting can determine, is this someone who's willing to flip sides? Is this person who's just trying to avoid conflict? Or is this someone who's going to go down fighting for their boss? Because it'll be far worse if they cave, right? And that's something that is really interesting about this. And it's also the social aspect of this. I have a former coworker. We went to different companies after we worked together. They live up in Dallas, and his weekend is basically, he got back into D&D a while back. He's got adult kids. He's got a younger, I think his son is probably in middle school now, but they have friends over, they have a cookout, and then they sit around the dining room table and they play Dungeons and Dragons together. So it's his whole family, his core family plus their close friends, all playing Dungeons and Dragons. And they play it to be fun. He picks characters and situations from popular like TV and movies or superheroes where they have similar sounding names. And it's all in good fun. They have a lot of fun doing that. And that's how they play. There are some people who are kind of sticklers for the rules, and they may come in and they run it a different way. So every dungeon master has their way of playing. At the end of the last game, I had mentioned someone named Matt Mercer. This is a person who is a voice actor, very, very popular in that community. Does the voices for a lot of video games, does a lot of voices for anime. There's a lot of anime. I mean, a lot of the people who were playing in a group, they call themselves Critical Role. It's actually a business. On a whim, someone said, "Hey, let's have a birthday party for a friend." Half the people didn't know who this person was, but they came along to help with the Dungeons and Dragons because they hadn't played in a long time and thought, "Hey, this would be a fun birthday event. Let's play Dungeons and Dragons together." And then they kept playing and playing. And then they had an opportunity from a friend of theirs to say, hey, I'm starting this stream where people play games online, and it's game themed and different types of games. And it was called Geek and Sundry. That was the name of the channel. So partway through this campaign, they started streaming live. And then there was a lot of backstory. These were all actors who played improv. And that's how a lot of people, a lot of us were talking about it after the stream last time, is most of us knew who these people were. We've seen it. Some of us follow it. I used to follow very religiously, not as much anymore, but I'm trying to get back into it. They're on their third campaign, and their campaigns are well over 100 different episodes. And the episodes are 4 or 5 hours long sometimes longer. And they're used to improvising, and they're playing their characters. They are creating backstories for themselves. And it's really like watching a long story unfold, like a Lord of the Rings type adventure. But Matt Mercer was very famous because he started broadcasting this. He's an amazing dungeon master. He really gets in the character. He knows how to improvise what's going on. He's coined a lot of different terms, and including like if someone kills the last monster in a fight, he tells the person, how do you want to do this? It's kind of his famous little tagline there. He also is famous for saying, you can certainly try, right? Someone says, hey, I think I want to climb that wall. It's like, well, you can certainly try. I mean, it's smooth, and, there's a description of it and so on. But this adventure that we're playing on Tuesday nights, it's called Waterdeep DragonHeist. That's the name of the adventure. It's in a book. Well, it turns out Matt Mercer was actually one of the technical consultants for the game. They actually did an interview with him. I think it was for the D&D Beyond channel on YouTube. So you can easily find this interview where he describes how it was like working with the people who make D&D to work on the adventure. And then all of the choices they did it very differently than a lot of other adventures, which is one of the reasons why I picked it. I mean, you can play it once, and then you can play it again, and it'll be a very different thing, a different antagonist, a different set of situations. Even though the maps may be the same, it's done differently so that it's a different chase, like you're doing now, to find the stone of galore. That's what we're doing right now, is trying to find this stone. And with it, find a way to get into this hidden hoard of gold coins that someone has stashed away. Let's see, reading again. Let's see. So D&D. Yeah, so everyone has options. So TJ, so one thing is people have used to criticize the Critical Role people, said, hey, you guys are scripting this. I really do think they're improvising because they've made choices, and some of them have lost their characters. There have been things where they're broadcasting live and people are like, you could see someone's in a dilemma. What do I do? And it's like seeing someone in a real life or death situation. What do I do? And they protect their friends, they die, and then people feel it. And the characters sometimes have, one of the actors actually on one of them said, I can't sit here right now. I got to walk out. Walked out, had to collect themselves because it was a very emotional moment in one of the campaigns. I think it was the campaign 2, something happened kind of early on. But if you want to see something really, really interesting online, it's on YouTube. It's called Critical Role. Actually, I'll type the name in chat for anyone who's interested. I won't type the link because I don't have it prepared, but Critical Role. Roll kind of has a play on words. It's like rolling the dice, but it's ROLE, I believe. And their symbol is a 20-sided die, and they've done a lot of interesting things in the gaming community. A lot of these people are in real TV shows and movies, as well as doing voice acting. And it's very entertaining. And seeing them play, it might be entertaining enough where if you're on the fence, maybe you'll see, oh, look, you can just be yourself. And that's how these guys started. They were just themselves. My son started a couple of years ago, right before the lockdown, and he got really into it. And then eventually it kind of faded. He found other things in life he wanted to do. But if I find a pickup game somewhere, he'd say, oh, yeah, I can do that. And he's watched a couple of these streams as well. And he's kind of enjoyed it. But if you like the social aspect of it, there are game stores, just like there are local fish stores, and see if they have a time where they play Adventures League. And if you want to ask the store about it, they'll be happy to talk about what they do. And they play not just Dungeons and Dragons. There's other games out there. There's a very popular one for Star Wars. Actually, there might be several different types of Star Wars games out there that I've seen people play. There's a few more obscure ones where people have these miniatures, and it looks like a Mad Max setting. And it looks like these people spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on their miniature sets. And they're playing in the game store on a big, wide table. So there are a lot of different games like that. I've looked at Kickstarters for games. I actually participated in one for Blade Runner. So there's a Blade Runner role-playing game that came out. It's set in the world of Blade Runner. If you've ever seen the Ridley Scott movie long ago with Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer, amazing movie, but it's set in that environment. There's one for The Expanse, which I have not had a chance to play yet, which is each one of these is a different set of rules they follow. They don't follow the Roll20 style rules, but you can also play them on Roll20. Roll20 is not just for Dungeons and Dragons. It's for a lot of these tabletop games. They call them virtual tabletop because maybe you have tokens on a table, or you have miniatures, and maybe you put these little walls up, and maybe the dungeon master has laid pieces of paper out on a table covering parts of the map, and they pick them up to show the room you just walked into and what's there. So there's a lot of different ways of playing games like that. Another one I want to try someday is for Stargate SG-1, because I used to like watching that show. But there's a lot of these out there. And if you go to Roll20, it's roll20.net, you'll see a lot of these different games listed there. So, for example, if there's something you remember playing with friends and you don't see them anymore, you can possibly play online with Roll20. And you don't have to stream it, on YouTube. You can play just virtually. You could have a conference call on the phone. I don't like the voice interface. There is one for Roll20, but no one's ever liked it, so Discord works really well. And Discord is free, too, for small groups. I think you can have at least up to 10 people in a voice chat easily in Discord. But yeah, this is all about getting into the social environment. And kind of expand on what the conversation going on. So thanks, Xanadudu and TJ, for chatting about this. But you get to pick your character. And I've seen people who really get into the character. I found during my Friday campaign that I was playing myself and not my character for a while, where I was afraid to take certain risks because I'm not really a risk taker in real life. And I decided to use my character's background and try and say, you know what, this person under certain circumstances would do this. And I took a risk. I made a deal with a hag to help my friends out. And so it helps the story along. And you get to pick how you want to play. Some people like to play as themselves. One thing I thought was really interesting, there are times where people, for example, with disabilities, they use these adventures to try to, do something different. But there are a lot of people, like especially people, I'm giving a specific case right now. So don't, I'm not trying to say any one thing other than I think what people wanted to do was there were people who, I'm confined to a wheelchair, but I don't want my character to be any different than who I really am. And so someone wrote some special rules for D&D for something called a combat chair. And it was a set of rules that when looking at, this was an educator, I think in England, because there were people they worked with that, look, I maybe they can't hear, or they're confined to a wheelchair, or they have something else. They want their to project that onto their character rather than be, this mighty superhero who can do all these things that they can't. They wanted to try to play around this, and so that gave them that opportunity to do that. In one of the campaigns in Critical Role, they introduced a character who was in a combat chair and a wheelchair, and I think they did a really good job with it. But there are ways of using the rules of D&D in ways just to make sure that everyone has fun. Everyone has a way to do a different experience, and to the point where, and this is no joke, somebody came up with an adventure for My Little Pony. And believe it or not, you use the Dungeons and Dragons rules. You're playing with the ponies, and if you have a young daughter who wants to play My Little Pony, somebody has one out there. You can download, look at, say, hey, this actually is fun. This is not all evil stuff. This is role playing for kids, and you roll dice to see the outcome of decisions and things like that. But it was a My Little Pony themed adventure using the Dungeons and Dragons rules. It's not anything to do with Dungeons or Dragons, but it's a rule system, and that's what this thing is here. This player's handbook. It's the only book and set of rules you need to play Dungeons and Dragons as it is now. This on the web. Yep. Gotta love Siri when it just decides to chat up like that. But anyway, it's got everything you need, all the spells, all the rules of how you do encounters, things that you would have thought would have been in that Dungeon Master guide. It talks about all the different rules for playing. What happens if someone is, lying unconscious and someone attacks them? How do you handle that? How do you handle underwater? And maybe everyone took a potion of water breathing, and you have an archer with a bow. Bows aren't going to work the same underwater. It's a fluid. And there are rules for how to do that. Can you use a ranged weapon underwater or not? And there are rules about that, but it's all in the one book. This is just a guide. It's kind of putting up the rails, and the DM can kind of soften the rails a bit to say this person is describing what they want to do in a way that if it's not in that rule book, I now have a way to handle that. And that's where we run these checks that you often hear, where we say, hey, run an athletics check, or do a history check, or an insight check. And these are different skills that are in the character sheet that basically the DM can say, okay, based on what you want to do, I come up with a difficulty level, a DC value. And that's what you have to succeed against for you to do what you're trying to do. And so if, for example, in trying to give the characters the ability to choose how they want to do it, that's not specifically in the rules cover it. The rules say, oh, well, okay, pick a DC, like what do they have to get on a 20-sided die or higher? And maybe it's, well, this is not bad. It's only a 5, right? It's like, jumping off the curb. I can do that very easily versus I'm going to jump 5 feet from the top of one rooftop to another. Well, okay, there's actually a rule for that, and distance and strength and all that. But if they want to do something like, okay, this is strength-based, so pick athletics or acrobatics. You pick. Which one do you think? Right now, pick it, and then I'll tell you if you succeed or not. You don't have to tell them what the successful roll is, but as the DM, you pick the difficulty before they roll, because the whole idea is it's a chance, right? Based on the situation you're giving me, I'm going to come up with some difficulty level, and it may be really high. It might say, hey, I need you to roll a 20 or higher in my head. And in the book, it says the same thing. You say, hey, if they're going to do this insight check, it's got to be this value or higher. It's hard. Well, maybe it's easy, but they get to pick their approach, and then you help them, guide them to the outcome. Oh, sorry, that didn't work. What do you want to try now? But if you try it again, it's more difficult. And that's the other thing in D&D is if someone tries to pick the lock and it didn't work and they keep trying, well, I'm sorry, it may get harder, or you may break your tools that you're using to try to pick the lock, or you may break the lock. So you can come up with those rules too, not rules, those decisions along the way as well as the Dungeon Master. But the whole idea of the Dungeon Master is to be the guide. You're not there. It's not an adversarial role. It's a way to make the environment work, the adventure work, so everyone has fun. And that's why it's fun to be the Dungeon Master. You're not trying to kill the party. And I know there are people out there when they were doing it, they were trying to kill the party. And in fact, on our Friday games, when they say, hey, how do you want to do this today? You want to make it hard, medium, or do you want to make it deadly? And a lot of times when given the choice, we all say deadly because we want that push our characters to the edge to see how they get out of these things. And sometimes it's very creative how people get out of these situations. And that's the fun of it. I mean, we're all trying to have fun. Sometimes characters do die, and there are ways of bringing them back. There certain cleric spells, for example, that can revivify people very, very early. In fact, I think revivify is the name of the spell. But then maybe there's a resurrection where it happened recently and the body's still there. And then there's really hard ones where we're like, hey, this person's been burned up. I mean, you really can't, but if you really spend a lot and you have a lot of, influence and magic, maybe you can, but it costs a lot to do it. Both in, how high a level that person has to be, just because it just doesn't really happen every day. But a lot of times what will happen if a character dies is you just bring in a new character. And so if everyone's at level 4, it's like, okay, you can roll a new character next time. And this is a chance to say, look, now that I know a little more about how I want to play, I want to play a little differently next time. Instead of being the fighter, the tanky person, going in there with weapons swinging, and they do a lot of damage and they can swing multiple times a turn, I want to be the weaker magic user, and I'm going to use my intelligence to get through situations and magic and things like that. Or they're going to be more nature-oriented and things like that. But in Xanadu, yes, the best part is you can help tell the story. It's whatever everyone wants to be, which is why I thought it was funny that this. I mean, funny, great, but there was this need where this educator saw, kids with a certain disability. A lot of them don't want to get rid of the disability. It's them. It's part of them. They want to play fantasy role playing with those traits that they have, those things that they've been dealing with, but they want to have it in their character as well, because that's what they want. I mean, that's them, right? And so in Critical Role, they had a very large part of the arc where someone was in a wheelchair, and they were out having these adventures and getting into deadly situations with everyone, and it was really well done. And that's the other thing about, if you really like what you're seeing with us, you should see Critical Role. At least try a few episodes. The early ones are really old, and they're great. Filtered out parts of their anime backgrounds because they realized, hey, this artwork is from somewhere. We don't know if we're allowed to show it. And then they stopped blurring it out further down the end because then I guess they got the permissions. But when they did the replays and put it on YouTube, they had to do some things. Now they are their own company. They do special activities. They show up at Comic-Con and people scream and yell for them, and lines go all the way around city blocks to try to meet them at Comic-Cons and conventions and things like that. But it's fun. And the best part is everyone can have fun playing, which is why, when someone said, hey, we're full up, but someone might want to DM and say, I'll DM. I have fun playing with the Dungeon Master. I actually have a game I played in a different type of world. And this is the other funny thing about Dungeons and Dragons is you can actually dream up your own world, which is what they did in Critical Role. It's a different world from the regular Dungeons and Dragons. If anyone has seen the movie, so for anyone on replay or anyone watching live right now, if you've seen the new movie that was out, Hasbro is advertising it. It is backed up by the actual Dungeons and Dragons people. There's a lot of little Easter eggs in there of things that people say at games, like, isn't that kind of arbitrary? And they kind of reference that in the movie too. It's all designed to be fun and have these adventures together, kind of like a theater of the mind, but you can actually play with little miniatures on a table. And that's how it was originally meant to be played. And I guess because it's how I got started, maybe I can cover some of that as well. How did Dungeons and Dragons start? And I'll tell it from my personal view. There's actually videos on the full history, all the way up to where we're playing now with 5th edition. And they say they're coming up with a 1D&D, which I haven't been able to get involved with. But when I was a little kid, so in the 70s, long time ago, my father was playing these games at game shops and on campus because he was in grad school, where it would be a huge table, like where someone would set up like maybe their model train set, very intricate landscape would be set up. And there would be little miniature soldiers. they were playing what was called Napoleonics. And I have no idea where they got the rules, but there were rules for them to play. And they had these little armies, and they had these little painted miniatures and little cannons and cavalry, where each little person represented a number of soldiers. And it would just be lines of them lined up, and it would be like the old, musket battles that you heard about when Napoleon was, trying to conquer the world. But they would be playing this system, and along the way, this game company came up with a set of rules called Chainmail, and it was in a little tiny, wasn't really spiral bound. It was something similar, but it was a small book, probably about a little more than half the size of the current books you see, and it was not too thick, but it was rules for playing with miniatures in like the Middle Ages. So you had like a man at arms with splint mail or leather armor or chain mail. You had rules for the mounted combat and how they would see if they would hit, how they would take damage, and it was just ways for you could have all these miniatures on a table and play against each other. And then someone decided, but what if it's a wizard? I mean, the Lord of the Rings started creeping into this. What if it's not a human, it's an orc? What is that? And there were some special rules that were added to it. Well, that led to a set of very small books that came in a box set. It was a 3-book set, which I used to have one, but it disappeared on me somewhere in my moves. And that was the original Dungeons and Dragons. And then they came up with a basic set, which was a smaller set of rules, and it came in a box with a big dragon on it. And whenever I say it's the Red Dragon box set, I realize, they're thinking of the new basic edition, which came out probably when I was maybe in college or high school. But there was one when I was in elementary school. And that's the version that I got as a kid. And then I found the others because my dad was always going to the game shop. And that's how D&D got started, was just a way for people to play with these rules. And being a fan of Lord of the Rings, I wanted to play. And then you started seeing when they came out with the book versions, which I think was what's called first edition, they had a player's handbook, a dungeon master's guide, the monster manual. Those were the first 3 books in that series. You would see kids with them at school, and that's how you found people to play with. So, is that the DM guy? Do you play D&D? Hey, let's play after school, right? And you start meeting people that you never would have talked to in elementary school, for me, and then middle school a little bit, and then high school not as much, because then eventually other things came into my life. But then when there was an opportunity to come back and play, I discovered the 5th edition, and now that I've got more time, it makes a lot of sense. Oh wow, Xanadu, the original chainmail rulebook was like 18 pages. It was not big. I used to have that. Half the games in my box are gone, and it included all my D&D original books. Chainmail was one. They came out with a variant called Boot Hill, which was playing westerns with similar rules to D&D. There was one for spying, so I had one of those too. I still have that one. I think I found that. And then there was a different set of adventures called Traveler. That was really popular too, but it was all in space. So if you've ever seen The Expanse on Sci-Fi Network or Amazon, it was very much like that, where it was trying to be a plausible space game. Except there was this thing where you could do interstellar travel, where you could jump from one system to another. And that was really popular too, because you rolled dice. Sometimes you only rolled 6-sided dice. But with D&D, there's a whole collection of different types of dice. And if you do want to play in person, for anyone, I don't know, TJ, if you're ever interested, check out a local game store. And there's probably many in your area anyway. Some of the more rural places, it may take an hour or more to get to one of those places, and it's not viable. But then again, I'll bring it up right now. There's always Roll20. There's also another system called Foundry. I found Warhorn, and I brought it up. Warhorn.net. I haven't been on this site in over 2 years, but it'll tell you about different types of events, different places to play. You can search it, and it's free. At least it was when I was looking at it. If it's changed, I'm sorry. I haven't used this in so long because I just have my regular games. And then jumping on with the Fish Court, it was like a perfect opportunity to start another game. and play D&D again. So I'm going to wrap up pretty quick because I'm, you can tell my voice is kind of going. It's been a long day, but I did want to talk about D&D and how we got into it. Everyone's story is a little different. I know a lot of people start at different times. Probably like Rico may have started about the same time I did. But, there are people who found it too when it was like second edition or third edition, where the rules got really, really complex. And maybe to close, that's kind of how D&D went. It started very simple, and the art got to very complex, trying to be hyper realistic. Here's all these different situations and how you do it, and then back to simple again to try to make it as easy for someone to play as possible, where we can bring in people who have never ever played, let them feel comfortable about it. And if you go to a game shop and say, I've never played before, but I want to try, there are dungeon masters who are at that game shop on those time slots that do it because they enjoy it. They like bringing in new people. There are usually other players who will be happy to help. And, there are people who are always there, and then there are people who kind of drop in from time to time. Only Oscars, June had mentioned on her stream last week, she used to have to drop her kid off all the time, when he was younger. And I said, yeah, I remember those days. I was the kid who got dropped off, though. So, I could kind of hear her perspective on it. And it was funny. I thought it was funny. So, June, if you're seeing this, I thought it was, my parents were like, oh, God, I got to take my son to play D&D. But usually my father would drop me off because he was probably a couple rooms over in this campus area playing his Napoleonics. It's fun. And there's more than just Dungeons and Dragons. There's other themes. If you're into space games, there's a variant of D&D. It was actually, I can't remember how it started. It's called Pathfinder, and there's a second edition Pathfinder, which I heard is really good. Very, very, very close to D&D, because I think they were split off somehow. They had maybe open source rules, but then they made it their own. And it's grown in its own stream separate from that. And they had a space version of that as well. I think it's called Starfinder, maybe. I could be wrong. Sorry if I am. But now there's other ones out there. If you just look at a game store, there are so many different games out there. And there are games that are just board games. There are games that you just set out the board like you've set out Monopoly or Life or some other game, but you're playing in some other world. You're doing a survival game, or you're doing like a World War II setting, or some other fantasy or sci-fi environment that you're doing. But they're all out there. There's lots of things to do, and it's all for the people who play. It's the social experience. You're having fun with people you like to be with, and that's what I like about what we're doing here on YouTube, what I'm doing on my channel, what Jason's doing on the Mr. Manifesto channel. But if you want to play on your own, you don't have to stream it. There's no reason to even have StreamYard or YouTube or video even. I just get on Discord. And if you've never used Discord, I know there's a few people who have started using it, like Chattanooga Ed has just started using it, and he's gotten very good at it more recently. It's just another tool. It's another tool to use in the world we're in. That also helps people stay connected and do things together. So like if you have friends you used to play some game with, see if it's on Roll20 or see if there's another online version of it. There's nothing preventing you if there's an online version of a board game that you played or some other tabletop game of getting it set up and doing it again, even if people are on the other side of the world. With that, I think I'm going to call it a night. We're not going to be streaming next week. I'm actually traveling next week for work, just for a couple days, but I do plan on being back. Hopefully everyone will be able to join the following week. This will be the 20. I'll look it up. I don't want to give a date out and be wrong. And sometimes I slip up when I schedule because Roll20. StreamYard will somehow put me in tomorrow and I'll add 7 days to it. So I'll double check the dates this time. I've caught it myself once. I know a few people in Discord caught it, and I didn't pick it up because I don't go to Discord much anymore now that I'm back in working outside of government. But I've got more work to do, right? So anyway, thanks Xanadudu, TJ for joining. Anyone who's on the replay, hope this was interesting for you. You can put a comment in. Also, I can direct message you somehow outside. If you're on the Fishcord or any of the Fish Fam groups, just let me know if you're interested. I can send links. I'm sure Jason can do the same, or Rico might know a few places too. But there's lots of ways to play Dungeons and Dragons or other games online. You can play in person. I actually prefer in person, but sometimes it's hard to do that, especially in certain parts of the world where the nearest player could be an hour away, or maybe they're next door, but the place to play is an hour away or more. So hopefully everyone gets a chance. Hey, Ed, how are you doing? I was just wrapping up the stream, but I was going over how I got started, how it's very much about social interaction with people and problem solving. So with that, I'm gonna call it a night. Getting kind of tired, and I'll see everyone around on the other live streams. So, all right, have a good 4th of July, everyone, and see you all soon.